What's up, fellow internet denizens? When I was little, I used to read Highlights magazine, which would often run a column on cool little tidbits the average American child wouldn't necessarily know, like why Mexican families celebrate Las Posadas, what kente cloth is, how to train parrots to talk, and so on. So one edition ran an article on a mysterious variety of English spoken in my home state, a language only a few old people could understand, but that some people are trying to revitalize. A language indistinguishable from, yet completely incomprehensible to, those who speak conventional American English. A language called Boontling.
Gano crop good and plenty higs. Many kimmies and bald dames come long ways by Ganos and Johnny Pete.
NorCal, to someone like me who grew up in SoCal, is the black, shadowy elephant graveyard where good little lion cubs aren't supposed to go, where they get weird about how you use the word hella, and where they don't like when you call freeways the 101 or the 405 for some reason. Honestly, it's a good place aside from our shibboleths, but there's still a kind of rivalry there, if that makes sense. What is a shibboleth? Well, it's a subtle dialect difference that distinguishes one type of person from another. Boontling is not a shibboleth by any definition, as the differences between it and NorCal English are quite pronounced, literally and figuratively. It's more of what linguists call an argot. Now, what is an argot? An argot is a language that is specifically designed to be only understood by a small in-group. Boontling is a language spoken in Boonville, California that sounds exactly like base English, yet cannot be understood by anyone who is not from that small, unincorporated community. Before I go on, how about we listen to some actual speakers to see what I mean?
The Minks being more gray mattery than the Yanks and Kimmies, slib their harp and hilt your boot too.
Did some posy tweed string soccer up there?
Arctis Mosh.
Yeah. String it bad?
Yeah, strung it.
Let's set the scene. Boonville, or Boont in Boontling, is in the upper Anderson Valley of the Mendocino region of Northern California. The nearest city is Ukiah, which is 20 miles up the 253. Boonville was originally inhabited by the Northern Pomo. Unusually for California, there was not a lot of Spanish influence on this area, despite it being a Spanish and later Mexican territory. But there's still enough for us to put a pin in the Spanish. Now, in 1851, the first white settlers arrived in Anderson Valley, led by one Walter Anderson, for whom the valley is named. The Pomo didn't like this and started defending their territory, and Anderson's settlers left for a few years until the natives were unfortunately rounded up and forcibly relocated to a reservation by Fort Bragg. This is not the last time we hear about the Pomo either, so put a pin in them too. Anyway, one of the families that migrated into the valley with Anderson was the Boone family, after whom Boonville was named. Most white settlers in the valley were Southerners of Scots-Irish descent and were notably outgoing and friendly to the point where hospitality was mandatory. So, what happens when a community consisting of a relatively homogeneous demographic of outgoing people springs up in an insular valley at a time before cars and mass communication? That's usually how a dialect springs up. However, Boontling isn't a dialect, as I stated before, it's an argot, and those spring up in different circumstances entirely. So, how did Boontling spring up? Well, there are three schools of thought. The most common one posits that it was a secret code language created by teens and preteens so that their parents couldn't understand them, and it naturally became its own thing when the children became parents themselves. Another posits that adults came up with Boontling as a way to gossip without their kids understanding, but the clever kids picked up on it. This theory is backed up by the fact that there are a lot of words referencing different mature topics. The third theory states that it was developed by sheep shearers in their mid to late 20s who also played baseball together, and their younger siblings picked it up and brought it to school with them. We also don't really know when Boontling began. Linguist Charles C. Adams, author of the book Boontling, An American Lingo, states that the earliest possible date is either sometime in the late 1870s or the early 1880s. Based on accounts from the time, the language most likely started in the 1880s and significantly expanded its vocabulary as it gained more speakers towards the turn of the century. So, who all spoke Boontling? At its peak, Boontling was mostly used by men. Girls were often discouraged from speaking it, partly because a lot of the subject matter of Boontling was, again, rather mature and seen as improper. However, this didn't stop women from learning the language anyway, whether it was to understand passing comments about their looks or just to keep track of baseball scores. Many Boone Boonters used to play this sort of game with outsiders where they would insert a bunch of Boontling words into their talk and see how long the outsider would pretend to understand them. The game, of course, had a name of its own, Sharking. In fact, the language itself was a sort of game, where speakers would add new words all the time, and other speakers would pick out the meaning based on context. So time went on, and World War I hit. Many speakers either died in the war or left once it was over. Then the automobile and telephone crept their way into Boont, giving them better access to the outside world. All of these things, however, didn't kill the language like you would think. In fact, speakers kept using it as sort of a ritualistic language when they were hunting or fishing. However, just after World War II, a large wave of young newcomers came to help with the booming lumber industry, outnumbering the original speakers. These newcomers saw the people of Boonville as backwards hicks, and this sentiment discouraged younger people from learning the language. Then, when the lumber industry in the area collapsed and all the younger people left, not a lot of people really spoke Boontling anymore. As it declined, however, Boonters Jack June and Mac Miller, no, not that one, decided to record Boontling and get more people to harp, or speak it, along with the help of several linguists. So where did these words come from? Well, many of them are distorted English words like ebol, short for eyeball, meaning to look. Some come from automatopoeia like squeaky teak, meaning ground squirrel, charl, being the sound that milk makes when it hits an empty bucket, meaning to milk, and kilopedy, based on the sound of horse hoofs, meaning to travel by horseback. Some words specifically came from Scots, like wee, meaning little, and deek, meaning to look at or observe. Some words came from the Pomo languages, like boo, meaning potato, boche, meaning deer, and caixbook, meaning pregnant. Some came from Spanish, like brego, from borrego, meaning a type of sheep, and dulce, from dulce, or sweet. It is worth noting that a lot of Spanish and Pomo words refer to things that were very important to Boont culture at the time, like things that you hunt and farm. Boontling includes many English affixes and morphological patterns. For example, ball means good, and adding the suffix est makes bahlest, meaning best. Jape means to drive, and adding the suffix would make japer, or driver. It also follows the standard English grammatical structure with subject, verb, object order, and adjectives before nouns. Often, though, many words seen as unnecessary are omitted. For example, in the sentence Kimmy strung huger boche, meaning the man killed a big deer, the articles the and a are eliminated. Sometimes speakers omit to be, leading to sentences like kai beligern or the coyote is underground. This tendency to omit words altogether likely led to Boontling's other name, Shortling. Boonters often liked giving each other nicknames, usually from a defining characteristic or feature of the person. For example, the nickname cab could come from cabbage head or bald. Paintbrush could refer to someone who has a thick, bushy mustache. Places also got nicknamed based on traits. The sea was called the Briny, cities were called the Bright Lights. Ukiah was called Rack Track due to a maintenance man from there who had a racking cough. So I mentioned that Boontling often distorts English words. Well, this comes in a lot of forms, actually. Sometimes Boonters portmanteau words or put parts of them together, like with tidrick coming from tea drink. Sometimes Boonters clip or take off parts of a word, creating tobe from tobacco. Sometimes there's an odd sort of combination of portmanteauing and clipping. For example, afe stemming from a truncation of a fart, and lieber coming from grizzly bear. There is also a unique pattern of replacing vowels with e, like track becoming treak and dime becoming deem. This can happen to any vowel. The e replacement seems to come from an old Scots tendency to do so in words like deed, meaning dead. Sometimes all three of the aforementioned changes happen at once, clipping and portmanteauing a word like high school, then transforming it into heast by replacing the vowel. The thing is, this is still productive, meaning that new words can be formed, especially in the context of the Boontling game of sharking. Charles C. Adams tried this by combining the words fuzzy and gano, meaning apple, and clipping the end, finally devoicing the G to create the word fuzzeek. This word was instantaneously accepted by Boonters. There are more than 1,000 words in Boontling, and I don't mean to BJ here, but many of these words are mature. For the sake of the algorithm, I don't want to spend too much time blooching about batting to some huge mollies on a ball madge, but again, this language was probably made for gossip, so I'm obliged to touch on a few things here. Of course, burlapping wasn't the only taboo subject in Boontling. Some common mild swears include tish, or shit, teeps, or to take a piss, easel, meaning asshole, and slider, later, meaning a silent but deadly fart. One common subject of gossip was bulrushers, or illegitimate kids. This word comes from the story of Moses, where the titular child was drawn out of the bulrushes. Death, while not necessarily a mature or inappropriate topic, was taboo enough for several euphemisms to pop up, like flattened out or Saul's grandmother, both of which mean dead, and Dusty's, meaning cemetery. Drunkenness was also seen as taboo, with high-getters often hiding their tendencies and becoming silent horners. Those who horned too much got the fiddlers, or delirium tremens. Let's look at some more words. Blevins means a particularly bad carpenter, stemming from the Blevins family, all of whom were, get this, terrible carpenters. Buzzchick means baseball, and likely comes from the automatopoeia of a pitched ball whizzing through the air and getting hit by a bat. Dinklehonk means cowbell, for what I believe are fairly obvious reasons. That's my favorite word, by the way. I like dinklehonk. Pearl means rain, and it comes from the fact that raindrops look small, round, and shiny like pearls. When I first researched this episode, I was reminded of the book Frindle by Andrew Clements. In it, there was a teacher who crashes out when a kid asks where words come from and forces him to write an essay about it. So out of spite, the kid invents the word frindle, meaning pen. Soon all the kids at his school are saying frindle instead of pen. While it was only one word the kids invented, it still feels kind of parallel to Boontling. What do we do with this information? I think that as the web is constantly being trawled by bots who are programmed to steal what we say and use it for a number of reasons, it's time we start using our own jargon. Or maybe you'd just like to confuse old people and scammers, which is also a very fun hobby, speaking from experience. How would we go about this? We could speak only in references like Darmok and Gilad at Tanagra, but with Vines and TikTok. Drew Gooden passing the road sign. We could speak in hyper-specific fandom slang. We could inject words from major conlings into our speak like Toki Pona. If you already speak brain rot semi-frequently, why not make up more of your own and slowly inject it into your day-to-day posts? You could make a game of it. Try to see how long it takes for a normie to know that Covey means anyone born after March 1st, 2020. Coin words, warp pronunciation, go sharking, spread mischief, become ungovernable. Before I go, I want to thank every single one of you guys. My last video was a 500 sub special, and by now, I have over 1,000 subs. That is my entire elementary school. I did not expect this at all, and I'm going to make a follow-up to that video soon, where I go over a couple mistakes I made and talk about what you guys, yes, you, dear viewers, brought up in my comments, so stay tuned. Thank you for deking my beamsh. I've been Alien Daydreamer, and I am out. Bye!